Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jeremias, and I am here with my good friend and fellow pod host, fellow, whatever, fellow chatter here, my friend Bill Correll. And so we are really excited to be here with you today and to share just some ideas and thoughts we have about ways to navigate life in the most optimum way possible.
Excellent. You want to tell them what podcast they're listening to?
Oh, yes. We're lighting the candle, a world that works. Thank you,
Yes,
Bill.
we are. And we're also pretty sure that it doesn't matter what order you do things, as long as you get them all in there, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, sure. So, hallelujah. For me, anyway, I live and die by the sun. I absolutely love, the longer days in terms of when I can get outside. And, with the spring ahead happening yesterday, it is lovely outside. And then in addition to that, it's over 60 degrees here right now, which is, oh my goodness. Have you been out with Tonka yet?
Well, we went out, but we have to get out for a walk. I mean, we've been out and about, but we didn't get to enjoy except to for a few minutes. And I feel like we really need, I walked out of the store when we ran an errand between meetings. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we've got to go for a walk,
It's good stuff. I can't wait to get back out. I was out for quite a while yesterday, did a little bit of driving around and had a couple of really nice meals, one with our friend Karen, who we both know and love. And then got together with my wife last night. And funny enough, we were hoping to see some people when we went out to dinner, at our local sushi place. And I'll be darned if the ones we were thinking of didn't show up. It was perfect.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
So
I was busy. I was busy doing taxes. That's what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the business taxes are due on the 15th. So I'm to the point right now. I've got everything done. I just need to print the file off and send it over to my guy. And he's been doing it for me for over 10 years. This will take him about 11 seconds from start to finish. Very simple this year.
Yeah. Well, I'm still working on my numbers. It takes me a long time. So. Yeah.
Well, good.
In between everything else that I have to get done, all the different projects I'm working on at the moment.
Right.
Which some of them are really excited. Have you ever seen those decks, where you people draw cards, their inspiration cards and things like that?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So I'm creating a deck with Mary Jane, who was on the show, and this other woman who we know, Darlene. So we're doing a deck. I'm working on a chapter of another book and a contribution to another book.
Nice.
And I actually was asked to write the closing chapter. So I have my chapter, but then I was actually asked to write the closing chapter. So I have a deadline for that. So all of a sudden, my wheels are now turning and,
You're definitely the right person for the job. There's no question about that.
And thank you. Thank you.
Your name came up a couple of times in our conversation yesterday. And I think both of us are in your fan club. There's no question about it. We think the world of you.
I love Karen. Karen's really sweet.
So, it occurs to me, I don't know if we ever really did spend some time kind of speaking for and distinguishing friendship, through all the things and the conversations that we've had over going on 4 years now, I'm just really wondering. I don't hear a lot of people talking about friendship, like a thing or an occurrence, or it's kind of. I'm sitting here noticing how many people I consider to be friends in the world, and I haven't asked them, um, but but I'm okay not knowing. All right.
It's actually kind of funny though, Bill. You didn't
Yes.
like it just came out like and it was just like made me chuckle because I don't think we think about asking people like if they want a friend or or
It just reminds me of when I had three sisters, and the oldest of the three is 4 years younger than me. And when she was about 4 years old, when some of her little playmate friends would come over, she would grab him by the arm and she would look him in the eye and she'd say, "My girlfriend, do you like me?" You know. And so that's she was courageous and looking for the verification. I never heard anybody say no. I That might have been a showstopper for a 4-year-old. I don't think it would have been like, well, so what's up with that? What did I do to you?
well, I'm thinking about it and for a long time it was like, oh, this person's my best friend,
Right,
kind of thing. And I don't and I think, it was kind of interesting because I think I got trapped into that for a long time.
right,
Um, like, oh, I don't really have anybody who I'd consider my best friend or my anybody or my anybody's best friend. And
right,
then I realized that it was kind of silly, that I have people that I have certain types of friends, different friends I have business friends and I have, people that I almost consider family, like they're so close to me, I consider them almost like family.
right.
But labeling them is just like, to get beyond what the label was, it got to be a day, then all of a sudden my friendships kind of grew because I wasn't trying to categorize them into a particular way.
I can
And I
identify with that. Yeah. I mean, for me, I've many of my Facebook posts I address to friends, relatives, and loved ones. Like three groups. Um, but I think loved ones is by far the largest group in my life. I I'm not at all stingy, and there's no particular criteria. I pretty much love everybody. Um, and then what happens after that is kind of up to the people after I meet them. You know.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think about that idea of friendship because I've written about it a number of times. Um, because I think that, I think it was also became very important to me because friendships evolve.
Yeah.
Like they're not stagnant things. And so like I have my really close friend that lives really like 20 minutes from me now. Do we talk to each other every day? No.
No.
Do we but she's like a sister to me. I mean, we've known each other our entire lives from the time we were like, toddlers. So really basically our entire existence. We are very different people. And we live very different lives, but yet I love her to pieces and I would do anything for her. And that friendship has totally changed through the years from times where we were like what we would might have considered at the time when you're a kid a best friend to times when we lived very far from each other. We kind of went through a number of years where we didn't connect very often and
Right.
maybe we spoke once a year and yet it felt like no time had passed. It was like and so that's really to me like a friend that has the like that's withstood the test of time.
Right. Yeah. And maybe stood the test of a moment. I think when I think about the folks that I have always called my best friends, these are people that I've really gone through very difficult times with, either severe health problems for them or for me, or someone that we both love together. But when we were kids, who I hung out with most of the time all summer long, that's who became my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
Played baseball together. We rode our bikes. We did all those things that boys do. And of course, Steve Beischer was my best friend, or Blaine Miranda was my best friend. Even then, I had probably 8 or 9 best friends, but it all depended on who I spent the most time with that week, because I just loved them all. But when
Mm-hmm.
you stop and think about it, as time goes on, and you've got folks that have been in your life for 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years, there's people who I was best friends with at several different parts of my life that we're distant with right now. And it takes a conversation, to kind of recreate that friendship bond again, if you will. It's like it's there. However, it's an undiscovered country again. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And I do agree. It is like there is a moment where you do have to kind of all of a sudden you have to go through it again and kind of just, discover who each one of you is at that point,
Yeah.
because you have changed. Um, and I think there's this idea of like friends that we talk a lot, just through our conversations here. What are the things that we touch upon? Like respect,
Right.
like things like that. And I think that those things come across, especially I think as you go through, like I look at that friendship that I had throughout, like, which I've had for, close to 60 years. Um, and like I said, I mean, there were times when we weren't like, she's a little bit younger than I am and a few years, not much. But there were times when, we didn't have much in common.
Right.
I mean, she got married and had kids and I had no kids. And so it was like, so all of a sudden a little bit, maybe she was busy doing that. And yet in the end, to me, all of a sudden you realize that, some of the things which maybe you consider differences really aren't very important, like are not important.
Yeah. And I think that opens a doorway to a part of the house where we normally wouldn't go. But if you think about what happens with really good friends, sometimes they drift apart. And sometimes it's as a result of what I would call a failed communication. Especially as we're getting older. Now, I'm not ready to cop to being old yet, Jen, not by a long shot. But as we're getting older and having an opportunity to spend time away from what I would consider to be, really, really good, close acquaintances for long periods of time, what I find is that in many of their lives, what's going on is a complete distraction to who they actually are. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean? So in some cases, it's a substance issue, where something's happened and they need painkillers, and now they're using more painkillers than they ought to, and they know it, because a good friend calls you out on that, right?
Right.
And asks what's going on with that. What do you need? I think an acquaintance wouldn't do that, but a really good friend is going to say, "Hey, I'm concerned about you. I'm not used to seeing you like this. What's going on? How can I help?"
I pulled up an excerpt, if you want me to share. So it's from David White's book. I wanted to say Constellations, I think it's from,
Yep.
um, where he talks about different words and he talks about the word friendship. And he starts out by saying, friendship is a mirror to presence and a testament to forgiveness. Friendship not only helps us to see ourselves through another's eyes, but can be sustained over the years only with someone who has repeatedly forgiven us for our trespasses, as we must find it in ourselves to forgive them in turn. A friend knows our difficulties and shadows and remains in sight, a companion to our vulnerabilities more than our triumphs. When we are under the strange illusion, we do not need them. An undercurrent of real friendship is a blessing exactly because its elemental form is rediscovered again and again through understanding and mercy.
Excuse me.
All friendships of any length are based on a continued mutual forgiveness. Without tolerance and mercy, all friendships die. In the course of years, a close friendship will always reveal the shadow in the other as much as ourselves. To remain friends, we must know the other and their difficulties and even their sins and encourage the best in them, not through critique, but through addressing the better part of them, the leading creative edge of their incarnation, thus subtly discouraging what makes them smaller, less generous, and less of themselves. Um, yeah, and then he goes on, but I mean, I highly recommend the book because I love the book. And I actually just not too long ago he came out with the second book, and I just got it. But I love this whole idea of this, like I said, it is a growing process. And a good friend is going to nurture, but it's also this idea to me of like, my chapter in my book that's coming out, or the contribution that I'm making, I talk about friends as being like a garden, and you have to water it, and you have to nurture it. And whatever you say, I think I used the word fertilize it with love and compassion and forgiveness. Like you have to, because that visual was really beautiful for me because I wrote about having a garden of friends that I basically have chosen, like a field, like you plant in a garden. Like I've picked those people, which is also really beautiful when we think about it. We always say that you can't pick your family, but you pick your friends.
Yes, exactly. And life's biggest puzzle is how do you make your family be a friend that you've picked?
Yes, yes, it is.
It
That's a
seems like
really
it ought to be like that. And then I guess you get to be sort of 60 or 70 years old and you go, I don't know, maybe there's better use for my time. Yeah.
well. I was on I'm doing a program, so I was on the meeting yesterday, and in our breakout room, we were talking about expectations. Like what are our expectations around, like in life in general? Because a lot of times what happens if it doesn't meet our expectations, that's where like suffering happens because we had a certain idea or expectation in our mind. And, you know, and one of my clients said to me this morning, yeah, sometimes with your family, it's like going to a hardware store and trying to buy bread. Just cracked up because I thought that kind of summed it up. It's like she's like expecting to go to the hardware store and you want to buy bread. She's like, it's just never gonna happen. Like and
Yeah.
I,
Then you wonder who's crazy.
right, exactly, exactly. So that just made me smile and laugh because I
I,
thought it was so true.
I agree. And I also love, the whole perspective of the notion of forgiveness. However, I would, and I'm going to grant all the space needed for that interpretation to fully just stand on its own the way you read it. But I would also say that in friendship, there's kind of like this curious expectation that there's something better coming, So no matter how badly I've been treated sometimes by people that I love, I never walk away from them. I had a dog that got hit by a car when I was very young. And as my dad was going out to the middle of the road, to pick Sammy up, Sammy bit him 3 or 4 times on the arm. He was in such pain, and he loved and idolized my dad, but he was really struggling, and he was in so much pain. And so I can understand how human beings could be off kilter and off track to the point where the person that comes and picks them up in the center of the road has to, take that first brunt, that first reaction, that first. And I think that that's kind of a blessing that you can grant people, in my opinion, is that you can allow them to be human and to be with you in a way that they wouldn't, or obviously haven't been able to be with somebody else. Otherwise, they would be gone. They wouldn't need to express that, right?
I love that image and I love the way you describe that, Bill, because I think the other thing that happens with because I think, like I said, the whole idea of expectation. So
Yes.
when you go through something challenging, it's always interesting. And I use the word interesting or curious, you could use
Yep.
people all of a sudden who reach out to you and the people who don't. And that has through the years at points caused me extreme suffering
Yeah.
because the people that I thought should like reach out didn't. And with somewhat shock on my part. It was kind of like, we're really good friends. Like, I can't believe my father passed and they didn't reach out. Or
Right.
I can't believe, and then realizing that depending on what's going on in the person's life, and I try to do this as much as possible, and I'm a work in progress, I'll be honest,
That's
but
fine.
to sit there and say, at that point in their time and time, they could not reach out for whatever reason, they were not able to.
Right.
And trying to look at it from that, and like I said, it doesn't work for me all the time, but I try to bring that in.
Right.
So I figure that I'm definitely ahead of the game more than I used to be, you know, because I still work on that, but that's okay. I mean, because it's a constant evolution, it's a constant growth. But to sit there and not be so quick to anger and to judge someone for, what they're capable of is, it, and then also once you learn about people, you kind of learn what they are like what they feel comfortable doing and what they're capable of doing and what they're not capable of doing.
Right.
And but I remember that's, I think, that whole idea of expectation and going into a friendship with that sometimes, or just learning about people and just realizing that, you know, depending on how what the person's, kind of, I don't know, I'm looking for the right word, what their constitution is, not in a whatever, but what they're made up of,
Right.
they might not that might not be something they can do at the moment.
Yeah, we just never know how other people's lives are going really until we sit down and we ask. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of a fan of the Stoics, especially those quotes that you can deliver in in 15 words or less. But one of my favorite ones is that do all you can whenever you can, wherever you can, and expect nothing in return, and you will have a great life.
Mhm.
When your emphasis is on your own activities and how you're reaching out to the world and looking for those gaps that you now can fill and move into, in order to make the world a better place. I think your intentionality and your focus is not on other people's behavior. And it's when you're fully engaged in something, you're not going to notice another person's, shall we say, missing action. You're going to be so busy with your hands being full, doing what you can for the people you love. But the whole thing is that along with that, to be a human being is to have all of those, yes, and you get them all. Okay. You get the disappointment. It really does come. Now, what do you do with that? And maybe you learn how to do nothing with it. Maybe you learn how to just be with it for a moment and then go back to who you are, redouble your commitment to life and to the world, and operate from your commitment again.
Yeah, and having had an experience just about what we're talking about this past week, with expectations around something,
Right.
and um and having a meltdown. Like, I mean, I really like had a meltdown. But on the other hand, as one looking at that and having compassion for myself around that and not going through the whole idea of beating myself up around the fact that I'd had that meltdown,
Right.
not denying myself the space to feel whatever those feelings were, anger, sadness, whatever it was, and all of the above, like, the smorgasbord or the buffet of emotions that were coming up,
Yeah.
but also choosing that I wasn't going to live there. It's like I say that, like I was going to feel it and kind of be with it, and then maybe even not have it be totally gone, but say, okay, let me go out and get back to the work I love and the people I love. And at
Yes.
points it still comes up and I still, whatever it is. But it's just like, that's to me kind of like this almost refinement. Because let's say circumstances around like this thing I'm thinking about would have happened years ago, and I would have gone into like a deep, dark depression for like 3 months, where I would have functioned, but barely functioned. And I always say I knew I had grown or kind of evolved into a more, I want to say enlightened being, not enlightenment, but it's sort of aware and wise person. When all
You put the load down, it's no longer heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, where all of a
Definitely.
sudden, let's say it didn't last 3 months, it lasts a month, 2 months, and then it went down to a month, and then it went down to weeks, and then days and everything. But that was a whole process for me to kind of work with all these things like judgment and expectation and all those things. And, that took time for me to do
Yes.
with, but definitely a venture worthwhile. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have done it, would I have liked it to go maybe a smidge faster? Maybe at points, but I got there, and that's all that I can be thankful for. And then really, I think to me, I've been focusing a lot on this whole idea of not beating yourself up for being a human being. You know, the fact that we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes, that we do things and then we think to ourselves, I like the word skilled, like that was not skillful at all. Like I did not handle that in a skilled way at all.
Inartful. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Inartful. Yeah.
And almost, finding an element of humor in it. Like I was talking to my little pod of people that I was in yesterday with in a breakout room, and I said, I have this reminder on my phone now that's basically, what are you thinking right now? Like, what's your self-talk right now? And I said, it's almost like every time I go there and I'm having that same pattern of thought. For me, it's worry. Okay, I'm worried again. I'm thinking to myself, it's now almost funny. It's like I go there and I'm like, really? Like it's so background. And it actually is kind of funny. Like I realize, like, oh my gosh, you're there again. Like I can't believe you're there again. And I think because once I think you can laugh about it a little, it almost becomes lighter and not as intense, and you're not in that critical way. And so then I think you're more apt to change it. I think when you're always beating yourself up about it, it doesn't like you don't, it's almost like you're so busy whipping yourself that you can't move out of it. Like you can't see a solution. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it makes perfect sense because you and I belong to a race of people who pretty much suck at being the people that we are, So if we're smart, we get the joke early on in life. If we're not smart, we keep trying to solve the why did that happen? Okay. And the real goal is never looking for the why. It's called, what was that? And how soon can I replace it with what I want? You
Mhm.
know, the whole situation with the state of being, you can live in a world where what's handed to you, you have no control over, or you can live in a world where you realize that when someone hands something to you, you don't have to take it, and that's comes right down to, an experience that nobody is really voting on. It comes at you at the speed of light. It happens. Sometimes it feels like you were hit by a truck. What really happened was some words got said, and if you can ever, get to the point where you're setting that down, and it's always like, how can I, go less time being out of prime and being back in that equilibrium of empowerment? Because that equilibrium of empowerment is where you operate as an authentic human being and get things wrong because that's how the design is.
Mhm. Yeah, it was you know 2 weeks ago we were talking about you know, like extremes, and trying to, like what you described to me, whether you could use an equilibrium is finding the middle ground, finding the middle and kind
Right.
of staying in that middle. So you're not in that all or nothing kind of place.
Right.
And I was thinking about that in what was shared with us, was this whole idea that like the kind of labeling where one thing in your life is going wrong. Yeah, like for a lot of people anyway, let's just say they feel like their whole life is wrong. Like everything in their life is bad.
Yes.
And I'm not saying there are certain circumstances like you can feel like that. Like if you I was talking to a friend of mine who has a pretty severe injury at the moment. And I think that when you aren't physical, like you're incapacitated physically in some way, it's
Right.
very easy to go down that road because we feel helpless physically. We actually have to act, I think it's very easy to feel fragile and vulnerable. And I think all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, so I've had that, where it's depressing, it's scary, it's like all these emotions. But I think this whole idea of trying to realize that, you know, trying to look for all the other things that you have that are going right. So it might not be that life is wonderful. Like you're not going to like if you're if you have something bad, you might not feel that life is like, "Oh my god, life is just grand." But maybe you could find a place where it's like, "Okay, well this isn't going well, but I do have a lot of things." So it just kind of softens the edge over it and moves you
Yes.
a little bit more to a balanced place versus you're in the extremes. So I just thought that was really interesting and I've been thinking about that a lot of late, just over the past few weeks in my own life, you know.
Yeah, there's another aspect to this, okay? Intelligent people think that they can intelligent their way out of situations, okay? But there is a right brain and a left brain, and where the upset is occurring is not in the right brain. The logic side is not has nothing to do that. In fact, the left brain is screaming so loudly, the right side is just sitting there going, I hope she doesn't kill me right now, you know. God, let me live through this next 5 minutes because I hate it when she does this, but I know I gotta just let her run it out. See, so the whole thing is that there isn't a damn thing you can do about it because it's always there at some level waiting to come to the surface, and you really have to. It's as if you're going around your house looking for fire prevention opportunities, like, if fire comes, which window can I escape and not break a leg when I jump out the window? Where do I have to put a rope ladder, so
For me, it's always like, which window can I fit out where I can actually get Tonka out to?
yeah.
Like,
Right. So the neat thing is if you have that sort of self-talk after you've had an episode where you completely got taken to your knees and you're not yourself, the self that you intend to be, the self you know and love, that unmet expectation of you being that self is the first place where you have to deliver that forgiveness. You have to really start treating yourself like somebody to be honored in that situation. You got hit by a car, well, no, you didn't get hit by a car, somebody said something.
right. No,
Yeah,
no,
so
I mean, yeah, but that's the way it
yeah,
feels.
your
That's
response to it was no different than somebody driving through your front window and hitting you with their BMW.
right. And then all of a sudden you do. And I think that that's where, like, when we were talking about, when you talk about it, and I was mentioning, is that's where the self compassion comes into it, where you
Yes.
sit there and you say to yourself, that was a really nasty thing that that person said. And yes, feel what you're going to feel. And then maybe in my mind now, I sit there and I'm like, yeah, but you really have no idea what that person's going through today. Like maybe they had a bad day, maybe something is going on with them. Um, you know, trying to not to say that you didn't do something that maybe weren't like because we're not perfect. Maybe we did something that warranted that comment,
Well, see,
but
I think the real gold is not building them a hall pass,
no, not
for
at all.
you know what I mean? Because we talk about somebody triggering somebody else. That's nonsense. People get triggered. You don't trigger people, okay? And people who get triggered are people generally who've trained themselves and they wear it like a badge or something. But the point is that when you're in that situation, and the failure is there. If you can then immediately turn the responsibility back around, I know what I think I heard. Now let me see if I can figure out what the hell they mean. Okay. That takes it out of that, completely like your fingers licked and stuck into a wall outlet, where you can actually come back and you can say, now, wait a minute, great person, never seen anything like this before, which is why it just seems so out. What in the heck could they possibly be talking about? And then maybe you could go back with a simple little question like, I don't think I understood what you said. What do you really mean? and
Yeah.
and address it in the moment. That's where mastery comes in. When you have an expectation of great behavior on your part and the people that you love, because people that you don't love can't hurt you that way, can they? It's
Right.
got to be somebody you respect or somebody that you think it's important that they value your opinion or they value who you are in
They
order
value
for you
you.
to be,
Yep.
yeah, in order for you to be, but see, the real test is do you have what it takes to go back and have that conversation that goes beyond the being upset?
Well, and yeah, and I think that I look at, like, let's say my example from last week. Yes, I did have certain expectations around something. They were not meant. They were not met.
Right?
But it also happened on the anniversary of my dad's passing on
Right.
top of it. So I was feeling very emotional on that day anyway,
Right.
and kind of allowing myself that space of like, maybe I did overreact, but look at where you were when you began. Like, it wasn't like I was starting from, let's say, a 10 and I was I was in a great mood and I was like, whatever, I was firing with all my cylinders and I was like, oh my gosh, life is great kind of world kind of
Right.
thing. And it wasn't like I was, you know, really, I want to say, on the other extreme either way in the negative, but that was there and I was sad and kind of allowing myself that space of saying, yeah, but look at what day it is today. Yes, you're going around and yeah, you know, you remember him and you're thinking about him. And with every memory, there's kind of like not only the joy of the memory, but also the sadness that they're not there anymore. And so
Absolutely.
all of a sudden, not what like it happened on that day. So I think that like, okay, well, like give yourself a break. Maybe you didn't respond the way you wanted to respond.
Right.
And maybe there is no conversation that can be had afterwards because you've tried and whoever it is isn't receptive. And that's okay. That I don't need that. But just allowing, for me, it's always progress if you allow yourself to feel it, you don't run away from it or distract yourself from what it was. Um, you kind of show some compassion to yourself if it's, for, you know, um, I want to say for the the human beingness of yourself,
Yes.
and then what could I learn from this, and how can I and so what can I learn from this so that I navigate the next time easier, like so or maybe it doesn't happen, but how could I whatever I need to do in my own self work, and whether that's further manage my expectations or whatever it is, so that there is less suffering the next time around.
It's interesting. Now, see, I'm not a strategist. I've never found the right toolkit with tactics that could prepare me, for how to handle something before it happens. Um, I can only I can only credit being smart enough not to place myself in physical situations where it's a possibility. But if I spend my time being worried about that, am I missing out on all of the good stuff that life has to give? And at the end of the day, I'm always going to have the choice to be an asshole or not. Okay. And I say that word just that way because it communicates something very, see, that word in the people that I know, uh, what it usually means is someone who is unwilling, to change their behavior into something that's acceptable by the people that's around them and in a way that it almost is offensive, if you will. However, I'm willing because all the way out there, that's the worst I can ever be is to be that for somebody. It would never be my intention to get anywhere close to that. But guess what? Guess where that decision lies? It's right here, and I'll tell you what, in karate, it was like, I will always work with you to end something without a fight. But if it turns into a fight, you're going to get all of me.
I mean, I think, I look at what you're saying and I think to myself, that's really great. But there are certain situations, let's say, which with certain people who, let's say, where you've tried, where you still have to interact with them.
Right.
And that's a given, so that's what I mean is like, what can I do for myself that's going to best prepare me? And maybe there is nothing I can do. Like maybe I just have to say that, I have to be prepared that when I have my next encounter with them, that they might make me feel like I might feel or whatever. But,
Yes.
I look at the different things that I've experienced over the past, like, well, probably 40 years
Right.
with certain people. And like I said, I've moved mountains, like, I mean, kind of things like I've climbed Mount Everest in certain ways. And other ways, it's still hard. It's not necessarily easy. Um, it's taught me a lot. I mean, it's taught me about who I don't want to be, like, and how I don't want to act, in a lot of ways. But as far as thinking to myself that I could never be phased, I mean, or that this situation isn't going to repeat itself, the likelihood of that is probably very small, unless the people involved actually get a little bit enlightened and actually want to change. Like I can only change myself, and that's what I work on. I can't change anyone else.
Well, see, that's an interesting perspective. I'm not going to argue your point with you, but I will tell you that's how I made a lot of money coaching. Very powerful people that worked in highly stressful environments. I had a woman who was a provost at a New Hampshire university who had nothing but conflict going on with all of her charges. The
Mhm.
department heads were always fighting with each other, and her goal was to not be perceived as somebody that was taking sides. But it got to the point where people were being unruly with her, and so there's that. And then I had another guy who was working on it. Believe it or not, it was a contract for a little company called Nike, where they were installing multi-million-dollar software for doing supply chain planning. And he had to interact with two or three other people. And there was this one woman who was the real project manager who worked for a different company than him. And every time I got on a call with him, I had to talk him off of the ledge of she's doing it again. And I said to him, you know what? She's doing it again because you trained her to do that. And he said, what the hell are you talking about, Bill? I'm saying, what you've got to do, man, is you got to go sit down with her and say, hey, look, we have to work very closely for the next year and a half to get this thing up, running, and making money for the ultimate, client. And the best way for us to do that is to realize that you and I operate differently. We're not on the same kind of communications plane. There are things that I can say in front of you that seem to not sit right with you, and then there's that same thing in front of everybody else that I know doesn't seem to have that effect. What do we do when something like that comes up? How do we work on this together? So you're almost like using that to build the friendship bridge without making either of you wrong, and there's no
Right. No,
crowding.
absolutely. I mean, I think that's great if the other person is open for communication and
Well,
open
see,
to doing
sometimes
that.
they're not. We call those family members, okay?
Right, exactly, which is who I'm speaking of, it's mostly family, and I think that, in some circumstances, they're not open to a conversation. And, um, and then the other thing is not leaving things up, like not not leaving, like being clear on what you want.
Right.
Not in a hard way, but let's say being clear on what you want. Because I think that for myself, I look at it and I think to myself, well, maybe I was assuming too much about whatever I needed. And therefore, I wasn't clear in my delivery of what would have, what I needed. And
Right.
so I can't really get upset unless I'm clear, because if I'm not clear, I can't assume that people understand, or know, like you said. You only know what people tell you or share with you.
Right.
So that's where I feel like, that's my work, is getting comfortable, for example, in voicing or articulating what I need in a particular situation, what I needed, or what I would want in a particular situation. And then if they don't, if they can't do it, or if they don't do it, then at least I know
Yeah.
that I did my best to make sure that they understood. And that's not, so, that kind of thing. So in that way, I kind of look at myself and say, okay, you know, what could I do better? Like, and maybe it's that, maybe it's actually articulating you know, what they said, but what happened and just how I felt, or not even going, because it's not about a blame thing. That's not what I'm saying. Is I don't want to, it's not like, oh, you did this to me, or you didn't do this to me. It's like you don't even go there. It's kind of
Right.
like, oh, well, in a month this is going to happen, and I just wondered, this is what I would, if you could do this for me, or if this, I would really appreciate it, or if we could, whatever it is. And then if it doesn't happen, you at least know that, you know, you were clear about what you needed.
Well, I again, I completely trust your description of the circumstances. Although in a generality, it's hard to relate, from a specific standpoint. But again, a lot of it has to do with how long are you going to have to be around this person really? Is
Oh,
this
yeah.
somebody? Is this somebody you can choose, to just plain, not spend your waking hours with? And I'll tell you, there's a thing. I read an article last week, and the title of the article was "Why People Are Distancing Themselves from Family."
Mhm.
It's a thing.
Mhm.
It's a thing. And I think that what's happened is that I think, if I were going to, I don't really, ascribe the sense of what they were talking about. They were had to do with how people are ideologically different than each other, which to me is an accident. It's all an accident of who you start listening to that makes sense to you the first time. So you keep listening for more of that. And then somewhere along the way, your bias is confirmed, the bias that you don't know you have. Okay. And that's what bias is that it's invisible. And that's why it's detrimental. I mean, if you believe a certain thing and you can articulate what it is and why, that's not bias. That's a decision that you've made about how the world ought to operate. So I think the thing that goes on there is there's kind of a continuum. It's not either this or that, but you have to decide. And if you give, your best shot to somebody who it's the hardest conversation for you to picture yourself ever happening, and you start it off by asking a few questions, and then you say, hey, since I have these questions, how about you and I have a conversation at the end of which we can completely disagree with each other, but we won't be angry? Is that
Mhm.
possible? Would you be up for that? And most people, I've never met anybody who just said no if there was something that we had that we were working on together. There have been other people who would say no to that no matter what I said, because
Mhm.
that's just that's where they are in life, right? They are
Mhm.
no people.
Right. No, I mean, one of the things that I really liked that you share, what you shared pretty early in this part of what you were saying, was this idea of questions, and the fact that, yes, it is an element of how much time you spend with that person. And it
Right.
is not surprising to me that people, yeah, I mean, the article I read, it was something like, it was pretty high. I mean, they did it in an age group, and they were talking about like 20 to 30-year-olds.
Yeah.
And they were saying that over 60% are estranged from their families.
Right.
And that number kind of shocked me. Like, I could not believe, like, that seemed very high to me, especially in a society where loneliness is like, a really huge issue. Because, I felt like if loneliness and connection are a really big issue now and you're estranged from your family, basically, like, are you like, no wonder people like, it's like it's just built. Like people don't know how to build and have a conversation. They're not used to communicating. There is they don't have connection. And so then it kind of makes sense that everybody's feeling depressed or, basically depressed and overwhelmed because, we are pack animals and we do need to feel like we are part of a pack.
Well, I think,
However you find that pack, wherever you find that pack.
and if you don't find a pack, you go online and you watch TikTok or you watch other things that are not necessarily good for you. But the more you listen to a particular kind of a thing, I'll tell you this: I watch YouTube, so my algorithm is going to feed me what I've been watching for the last three
Right.
weeks.
Right. No, absolutely.
I have looked at other people's YouTube. I'm afraid. I am afraid with the nonsense that's coming up on there. I mean, it's just people abjectly spewing hate and garbage, and I just really think to myself, I know how the algorithm works and I get things that pop up on mine it's not in my interest. Okay. But it's scary to me that people, that I love, um, are outwardly wonderful, this, that, and the other thing, but they're seeing things, in their feed that are all about hate, all about, that certain people, and with what's going on in the Middle East, part of it is that it is just fomenting hate and anger. And if you ask somebody a key question when you meet them and they don't answer the way that you want them to, the conversation ends. They're not one of us. And to me, part of it's the schools, part of it's the colleges, a whole lot of it is social media, and a whole lot of it is these algorithms that give you more of what they think you've been looking at. But I can't believe the producers that are producing all of this hate. It never would have been allowed under normal circumstances where the FCC had any type of guidance. But it's fully available and it's 100% there. I will not search for any of those things that I found on this one particular feed because I don't want them showing up in mine, and I have no idea how I could, get rid of them once they do.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just think that I don't, that's not I'm on YouTube to put things on YouTube, but I don't, I'm not searching that much on YouTube except for certain things that I subscribe to, which are
Right.
all like, either meditations and chanting and, like, so that's the stuff I'm fed, like kind of thing. But I think the other thing that happens when you talk about like when you just mentioned, like, what do? They spend time on TikTok. Not only are they fed the things that they need, but they're also fed this image of people which is false.
Yes.
So on top of being fed the negativity, they're fed all this stuff about a life that is very inauthentic. That, I think, I remember years ago, let's say, like all my challenges around family and everything like that. And I remember getting on, because I probably had the time at the time, because, you know, basically spending a lot of the holidays with friends if they asked or whatever, and then not having family I could spend those holidays with. I tended to be alone a lot. And
Right.
I would get on social media, and then all of a sudden, I would see 1,000 pictures of all these people who were spending time with their family, and it would make me feel like 1,000 times worse.
Right.
Like, if I was gonna be depressed, that kinda were gonna be push me over the edge, because
Right.
there I would be looking at all these pictures of people having happy family holiday dinners, and I was alone. And that was horrible. And finally, I just sort of like, and that's when I kind of disconnected from social media and personal posting and not following people's feeds, because I thought to myself, I don't need to be fed that. Like, that sort of makes me feel sad. and that's not what I need to perpetuate. So for myself, that was just not healthy for me. And so I think was kind of like, this idea of discernment or filtering and saying, okay, well, this is not, like kind of learning about myself and saying, this doesn't really serve me to do that to myself. And so I think that, not only are people fed that negative, but they're also spending a lot of time comparing themselves with other people in those platforms. I mean, I think
I
it's
think you
almost inevitable.
and I think the most horrible, undesirable part of all of it is that they have no idea that that's what's going on. They're not making choices. They're probably looking at what they're looking at and feeling really bad about it, but can't put it down. Just keeps showing up, and then before you know it, they're kind of inured, if you will. There's no that you don't have the same response, the negative gut response that you did the first time you saw something, where it was something that was completely not right. And then as time goes on, it's normal for things to be that way, and then it's not normal for people to say that this is horrible. No, why would you say it's normal? Not normal. I see it every day. Well,
Right.
it's horrible
Right.
that people are being conditioned and they're actually being brainwashed.
Right. And I sat there and I was like, first of all, as you navigate, you realize nobody like, all those stuff is like one day and you really have no idea what's going on in that person's life. So,
Right.
that one picture is that, of the beautiful table with the beautiful place settings, like kind of thing, and, but I think people do that every day, and not even like they just look at other people and they have this kind of all of a sudden they start to measure themselves based on those other people.
Yes.
And, and, and that's such a like, I think about how often I've done that, and yes, it is a normal emotion. I was listening to a podcast the other day and she was talking about what she called like big feelings, like the big feelings. And she says, that at points we all go through all the emotions. Like, when she said she doesn't like to label them, this woman who was speaking, as good or bad. It's not like she's like, what the actions you take based on them are labeled good and bad.
Right.
But it's part of being a human being to have all those different emotions.
Right.
It's, like anger is not necessarily bad, but if you go out and you're angry and you kill somebody, it's the action that you take based on that emotion, which is good or bad.
Right.
And, and so going around, but the whole idea of comparison, which I think, and I don't know whether it was Buddha or somebody who said, comparison is the root of all, is the root of all suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. The notion that other people even exist in your life is completely false.
Hmm.
That's not who they are. Who you think they are is not who they are.
Right.
And so that's dangerous for you to use your made up comparison as a yardstick for yourself. And I think, the teachings of Buddha, that the worst battle that any human being is their own notion of their self, like their self as an entity, the description that they would give other people of who they are, like it's something that maintains its structure through time, when it actually does not. It is affected by everything that happens to you and every person you speak with. And so back to the whole nature of what is friendship. And I think friendship is kind of missing in a lot of circles these days. And if we took our culture back to making friends first and then figuring out what we had to do for work together, I can't even imagine what kind of a cool place that would be to hang out.
Well, it's interesting because with this program I'm doing, we have the program that's met every Sunday for the past 6 weeks, but we had these little like groups that were meeting in between to kind of discuss what was covered. And
Right.
so this was the last one, and I think we're going to continue as a group of 5 or 6 people that are from different parts of the country and from different, or different parts of North America. And just so interesting how we want to continue. And we've built these kind of very deep relationships. Maybe it's also the topic,
Right.
but based on common beliefs and being authentic and sharing honestly and vulnerably. It's been very interesting because I think it's very deep, but actually very quite quick when I think about some of the friendships that I've developed over the past, like, let's say, 10 years, where it almost feels like I feel like we took the bullet train or something as far as like that kind of evolution. It's kind of like a boom, we're friends, kind of thing.
Yeah, life can be like that, can't it?
Yeah, and I think there's certain circumstances that are like that, where all of a sudden you go through something and all of a sudden you're like very, very deep friends very quickly based on a circumstance that you've both shared. And all of a sudden that bond is like really, really tight knit. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, that is really like, and it's beautiful when that happens, like you have that strong connection or that bond that happens with somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I'm going to go out on a limb here, but based on the people that I meet that I'm going to say that you're doing a remarkably good job at that.
Yeah, interestingly enough, because I never really thought that I was able to do that. And maybe because I've always felt like I kind of navigated life with behind a mask. Like I kind of portrayed to the world one aspect of myself, and then I didn't authentically share so much of myself. And then all of a sudden now it's almost like I feel like I'm a lot more authentic and who I am with people. And so then all of a sudden it's like, it's like, okay, it's kind of like not living, kind of like you're not trying to be friends with some social media like perfect person. It's kind of like, okay, here I am without makeup or whatever. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, here I am in my pajamas kind of thing, like that kind of attitude.
Well, I do know what you're saying, and I love how the people are thrown to think that being authentic is a good thing. Not always. Being authentic is a little bit like being pregnant. You either is or you isn't. Okay, there's no
true.
there's no continuum of authenticity. It's either on or it's off. And I think what's good for people is when they finally give up the notion that their strategies, and their tactics aren't working, but they don't know why, so they try it harder. Just be friends with people. See what that does.
Mhm.
See if the quality of your life doesn't improve a lot based on having really good conversations with people where you aren't being that A person that I was talking about earlier and not realizing that you're doing that because no one will tell you. You have to have a friend who will actually clue you in when you're being that A word. They have to love you more and be willing to take what comes after they say it, and that's a friend. So
Mhm,
I
mhm.
appreciate that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we're at the point where we probably ought to consider wrapping up here. Do you have
Mhm.
any thoughts to leave people with?
No, I mean, I guess it would be, I don't really know today. I feel like, this idea of friendship is so, so, so important. And this idea of connection
Yes.
is so important. And I think when you're not there, like when you've been in isolation for so long, it's so hard to think about, like, it's almost like it's scary to actually extend yourself. And,
Right.
I would say find something you love and see if you can find some like a group that does that same thing
Right.
or common interest. So you start on a common ground for now. So maybe, you know, m- maybe you like to garden and you join a gardening club, or maybe you like to hike and you can join a hiking club. Volunteering is always really, I think, a really nice way to meet people. But don't do something that meets once a quarter, you know, because then you're only, then there's no time to get to know somebody. Like I used to volunteer for like the food bank and I would do it on the holidays. Well, the rest of the year, that wasn't really going to help me as far as cultivating that relationship.
Right.
So find something that you really enjoy, and that hopefully, if you find some other people that really enjoy that, at least you're working from there to begin with. And so maybe you're not going to be friends with everybody, but there is the likelihood that at least you share that. And so find something that you share with other people. That would be my suggestion to people.
Yeah. I love it. And I think that's a darn good place for us to leave our thoughts for this week.
Absolutely.
I will invite you all, as we do every week, to reach out to somebody in your life that you care about. Let them know, contact them any way that you can think of. But maybe even go see them. But just let them know your life works because they're in it. And if they ever need anything from you, if they're ever having that dark moment where they're not quite sure whether they want to be here or not, tell them that you're the person that they can wake up any time of night or day, and that you'll be with them until it passes, because your life matters and their life matters to you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, my dear buddy. I do love these conversations, and I think I will just tell everybody again, we are lighting the candle, a world that works, and you're all part of it.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye for now, everyone.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.